Hi, I'm Danielle Gagne, editorial analyst for Commercial UAV News, and I'm looking forward to discussing how 2020 changed the drone industry with today's panelists, who are leaders from all over the ecosystem. Welcome, everyone. To start off, could each of you briefly introduce yourself and tell us what you do? Mike, let's roll with you first.
Hi, Danielle. Thanks. I'm Mike Blades with Frost & Sullivan. We are a consulting and research firm. I've been with the company for about just over 9 years. Before that, I was in the U.S. Air Force for 25 years. And the research we conduct in my area is aerospace and defense. And my focus has been on unmanned systems for almost the entire time that I've been with the company. And so that's why I'm here.
Great to have you. Edgar, how about you introduce yourself next?
Yes, thank you. So hello, everyone, and good morning or good afternoon. As you mentioned, my name is Edgar Valdez, and I've actually been with UPS for 14 years and actually joined the UPS Flight Forward team in February of last year, so actually part of the initial team. And my purpose at the time was actually to develop the actual organizational development, human resource, and that's actually transitioned now to the strategic regulatory function at this point. So I oversee that role. So I'm very excited today to talk to you about UPS Flight Forward and what we mean when we say we deliver what matters. Thank you.
Thank you, Edgar. Ted, how about you?
Hello, everybody. I'm Ted Lester, Chief Technologist at Aeros, which is part of GE Aviation, and it's pronounced Aeros. The X is silent, and we provide services to support advanced drone operations, including certification services and unmanned traffic management, or UTM. And we're primarily focused on the public safety and the enterprise verticals. So, welcome, everyone.
Good to have you, Ted. Adam, can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, hey everyone. I'm Adam Bree, CEO of Skydio. We're the leading US drone company, and our big focus is on autonomy, giving drones the ability to make intelligent decisions on their own, because we think that's a key for really most applications to scale. So our drones today are used by consumers, businesses, public safety agencies, government agencies for everything from inspection, mapping, monitoring to security and situational awareness.
Great to have you here, Adam. Matt, can you introduce yourself?
Sure thing. Good morning. I'm Matt Finelli with Skyward, a Verizon company. I'm our Director of Strategy and Operations. And at Skyward, we're trying to help commercial enterprises fly in more ways in more places. We've got some UTM services, some fleet management, and partnering with Verizon, we're trying to help the drone industry move into that routine beyond line of sight over connected LTE.
Fantastic. Looking forward to talking more about that later in this conversation. Hi, Grant. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hey, Danielle. Good to be with you again. I'm Grant Giat. I'm the Unmanned Aircraft Systems team leader and a partner at the law firm of Adams and Reese. I represent drone companies, service providers, as well as end-user industries that are increasingly utilizing drones. Much of my practice involves representing clients before the FAA or with FAA-related issues. And as of late, a large part of my practice has been representing clients who are seeking out ways to perform drone deliveries and thus need to go the type certification and Part 135 certification process.
I look forward to talking about that Part 135 process. Tom, last but not least, can you introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you, Danielle. Thank you to everyone here for allowing me to be a part of this. My name is Tom Walker. I'm the founder and CEO of DroneUp. We are a global drone services provider, providing not just drone services, inspection services, but innovation services and iteration services to public and private sector clients, both domestically and internationally. And we are also one of Grant Giat's proud customers in this space. So it's an honor to actually not just talk to him business, but to be on the panel with him here as well today. So thank you.
It's an honor to have you here as well, Tom. Now let's just dive into these questions. We have a bunch of questions that we want to talk about this year because a lot has happened. Looking back at when we were in 2019, about to go into 2020, what were your expectations for this year? And did it look anything like how this year played out? Let's just run through that. Mike, can we start off with you?
Oh, you're assuming I have an answer for this. Yes. No, first of all, I thanks for the questions that you put together, because I think they're really good. From a what do I expect in 2020 perspective, at the beginning of the year in the first quarter, we already kind of knew about COVID, but we put out a report on the 2020 Commercial Uas Outlook. And one of the things that we thought would happen would be an acceleration in the M&A and the consolidation of the market in general. It's weird because I thought COVID would actually accelerate that, and I haven't heard of a whole bunch of that. And that might be because there's quite a bit more opportunity and maybe more of a realization that autonomous and semi-autonomous drones might be a little bit more beneficial than people thought or were aware of until the COVID response came along. But just recently with FLIR announcing that they purchased Altavian, I think, or might be back in that sort of accelerated consolidation period where maybe I think we'll see that continue to 2020, 2021, where companies that maybe aren't finding the customers, aren't finding the revenues, are going to either go away or merge with other companies. So that's one thing that I saw from 2020 that I was a little bit surprised about. There might be some things that are going on that we don't know about with regards to companies that maybe not aren't doing as well and just haven't come to the forefront with the fact that they're not operating anymore, or that they're going to be part of something else. But I haven't heard a whole lot. I really did expect more.
Interesting. And you talked about autonomy, so I'd like to kick it over to Adam and ask, when you looked at 2019 and what were your plans and how has that played out in 2020?
Well, we certainly didn't predict COVID at the end of 2019. But, I think one of the big things that we've seen over the last few years, I think people have kind of overfit to this narrative that, DJI, the kind of 800-pound gorilla in this case, not in the room, had won and the whole thing was over and played out. And we never really believed that was true because the products themselves, I think, are still so immature compared to what's possible and what ultimately we believe will deliver the most value for customers. So, I think for a while we've been feeling like there was going to be a swing in the other direction. And certainly I think we've seen a lot of that this year. So that hasn't been a surprise. I think that's played out and continues to play out the way that we kind of felt it would. On the COVID front, I would say that, when it first hit, nobody really knew what to expect. And a lot of folks felt like the whole business world was just going to shut down and, the economy was going to grind to a halt. And, as we've seen, that's not what's happened. Some sectors have been dramatically impacted, others haven't. And in the drone world, at least from our perspective, I think what we've seen is that the customer use cases, almost all of the customer use cases, are as strong or stronger than they've ever been. Like the need to be able to do situational awareness, remote monitoring, accurate inspection without needing to put huge teams of people on the ground. All that stuff has really come into sharper focus. But at the same time, there's no question that COVID has introduced operational headwinds for both drone companies themselves and for customers. And so I think, optimistically, I think that we've seen the power of drones really highlighted in a way that everybody, including I think the general public, understands more than they probably did at the beginning of the year. But I still think there's increased friction in actually delivering that value for customers now.
Fantastic. Tom, speaking of headwinds, you've seen a lot happen. Was that what you're expecting in 2019?
It's an interesting question. I think every year we say, was this what you were expecting? And very rarely have I ever heard any seasoned business person say, this is exactly what we predicted and exactly how it came out. I giggle when I read this question beforehand because my first response was, well, no, I would love to say we predicted COVID and we were right, but I don't think anybody did. But I will tell you what I did see and what I did expect is we're a new industry even today. We're still new, and by all factors of that, regulatory, you still don't see a lot of, and I don't mean this pejoratively, but you don't see a lot of mature operations where everything is figured out and everything's right. We're all still new. We're still figuring that out. But I did see, what I have observed is the tenacity of this industry, which is something I've always believed in, because it takes a lot of commitment and it takes a lot of belief in what your product is to do what we're doing anyway in an industry, that I always talk about. What are we selling? To whom are we selling it? What are they buying? And how do we regulate it? And that tenacity was tested even more with COVID, I believe. And I've watched companies around us really find ways to survive and find ways to move the ball forward. But you've also seen some of the, de-investments where people, larger organizations have said, maybe now is not the right time. And for a whole other variety, of different financial impacts have made some changes that maybe we weren't expecting. But by and large, what did I predict? I predicted that the strong, agile companies would find a way to make progress in 20. And what I believe that we've seen is many of the great companies in our industry have done just that, even in the face of adversity that was brought, unexpectedly by COVID.
Absolutely. Ted, I'd like to kick it over to you. What was 2019 looking like, and how did, at the end of 2019, what was 2020 looking like, and what happened?
Yeah, well, definitely echo what everyone else has said about COVID. I mean, I think despite its horrific effects on people's lives, it has definitely opened some opportunities for the public to see the value in drones. And so I think that was a positive thing that we didn't expect. I think FAA rulemaking was probably a little slower than anyone expected. I think, the remote ID, ops over people, beyond visual line of sight rulemaking, we thought was going to be earlier in the year. And what is it today, the 14th? And still haven't seen those rules yet. So, looking forward to that. And I think that'll really crack open some more of the commercialization in the industry. At the Aeros business, I think we did follow through on our plans to kind of commercialize and operationalize our business, kind of going beyond, research and development, which we also did some of that this year, but really released our public safety solution in June and already have over 450 agencies on our platform. So we added a number of features as well. So I think, starting to see those trends towards, commercialization, operationalization of the industry, but there's still ways to go. And I think everyone's looking forward to next year.
I certainly am. Matt, how about you? What were your plans going into 2020, and how have they shaped out so far?
Yeah, the panel thus far, I think, has said it well. Nobody predicted COVID, and nobody predicted the impact that it was going to have on the world. Just one thing for our team, we had our main office hub is in Portland, Oregon, and then we got a few folks spread around the country in various other Verizon offices. But we went from really collaborative in-person culture to a fully remote workforce in a week. And I don't think we were unique in that. I think a lot of other folks experienced that same kind of distribution. And we also use that to our benefit in advancing the commercial drone operations. And we're successful running fully autonomous remote beyond line of sight operations. We did that in support of some wildfires. Again, 2020 just being the year of the calamity. And it helped, I think Adam said this well, it helped illustrate the true transformational power once these systems are deployed at scale. And that's, I think, a real opportunity that was doubly highlighted by the challenges of the pandemic and a number of the other natural disasters throughout this year. And I just was really proud of the things that our team did, both the things that we planned to do and the things that we had to react to over the course of the year.
Yeah, and there's been a lot we've had to kind of react to this year. Edgar, I'd like to kick it over to you. But looking at 2019, at the end of 2019, going into 2020, and now, what were you expecting and what happened?
Yeah, I think everyone's really touched on this. It was obviously an unexpected year, but 2019 was actually very much a very interesting year because it was a lot of firsts for us. It was obviously the establishment of Flight Forward in June of 2019, as well as also obtaining their carrier certificate in September of 2019. We announced various logistics services as well as part of 19, and such as WakeMed and really also even the establishment of some CVS deliveries. But with that, we actually continued the ability to be able to that expansion and that development of our network. Specifically, we're able to forge ahead and announce the use of drones to deliver prescriptions from CVS Pharmacy to the Villages, Florida, for the largest U.S. retirement community. We actually community of over 135,000 residents, and recently we actually were able to complete over 1,000 deliveries. So going into 2020, I think we were able to sharpen our focus and look more in regards to the actual logistics piece and really try to attack that. And our hope is that we'll continue that for 2021, continue that expansion, that rapid build out, look at various other technologies to verify and the drone safety with enabling that service expansion, construction of a potentially a centralized operations center. And so therefore we've really identified our potential strategic goals for the various, for this year, next year, and years after, and continue to chip it at that.
So do you think that COVID accelerated some of those processes?
That's a good question. I think there's, and I think it was touched on as well, that I think we were able to identify the benefit of drone technology, really drone transportation as a fast delivery option for medicines that really are time sensitive, while still actually supporting those social distancing efforts. So we were able to provide individuals with convenient alternative to really visiting a pharmacy. So specifically talking about villages. So this really, this program actually helped prioritize the protection of some of our healthcare heroes and population that needs it. So within that operation, what really mattered was keeping the high-risk demographic healthy and at home. And so I think there definitely were some opportunities to highlight the benefits of drone transportation during this unfortunate time.
Absolutely. And Grant, last but not least, looking at 2019 and going into 2020, what were you imagining for your clients and for yourself, and what has happened?
Well, prior to 2020, the majority of my work was corporate, putting together contracts for drone clients, assisting with various waivers, exemptions, the usual. What I was not anticipating was that there would be such a high demand for representation in drone delivery matters. So a large component of my practice, as stated earlier, has been working with companies with the FAA on type certification and Part 135 certification. I have to say, I think this year there has been, I don't know if I'd call it a shift, and I don't know if it's necessarily 100% COVID related, there has been a large amount of attention placed on manufacturers. In some in good ways, some in bad ways. I think Congress is really starting to take more of a vested interest in drone manufacturers and exactly what we are doing with this market, how we are sourcing our drones. And I think that's going to continue to be the case. I also think, as I said, a couple times, that deliveries have really kind of taken center stage, whether it be Part 135 deliveries, which, up to this point, we've had 3. There's 10 type certifications in process for companies, and there's a few more on the way as well. So we are going to be seeing more drone delivery. And, I, for one, think that COVID has certainly improved public perception. It used to be that for every negative drone story for every positive drone story I saw, I'd find 10 negative drone stories. Now it's almost 50-50. For every, like in the case of Drone Up, for example, for every case, you have the story of delivering the COVID-19 test kits under Part 107. And then you have the story of the drone flying through the streets, screaming at people to get back inside. So it is still a good for every negative almost, but prior to this, it used to be much more negative. So I think that's kind of helped not only with public perception, but I think the FAA this year, although the regulatory movement has been slower than all of us would like, I have noticed an excitement for advanced operations. Really, the FAA wants these companies to pioneers to set the way for drone deliveries, for safe drone deliveries that allow you to receive a good while you're still maintaining social distancing. And we've seen that firsthand. Social distancing and the ability to operate remotely has come to the forefront this year. And what better mechanism is there for encouraging remote operations than using an unmanned aircraft system, which by their nature, drones are social distancers. So I think it has been a horrible year for humanity, I guess you could say, in terms of COVID-19, but with every storm, comes a ray of light. And I think the ray of light has been for the drone industry this year.
Absolutely. There's been a lot of progress, and we're seeing that play out in so many different ways. And that kind of goes to my next question is, how does this shape our ecosystem for 2021 and beyond? And are we heading in the same direction we were back in 2019, or is this a different ballgame? And I'd like to open it up to anyone. Mike, I think you've unmuted, so if you'd like to jump in there.
I don't think 2021 is going to look like we expected it to last year. I think because of a lot of things that have already been set up, but I think to put a fine point on it, I think that maybe we've seen much more regulatory action than previously, and it's been in response to something that's required quick action. I mean, you've seen 24-hour beyond visual line of sight approvals for companies like Aerobotics. You've seen Tom's company get some pretty quick approvals for doing things that weren't, easily wavered in the past, and it's all been reactionary. And I think from a 20 to 30,000 foot view, that this is going to have an effect on how regulations get pushed forward in the future. It's going to be maybe a quicker process. When we have things that are already established and you have a precedent, and Grant could probably talk to this much better than I can, but if you have a precedent set, then it's much easier to get approval for follow-on operations than it was before. So I think we're going to see maybe a little bit of contraction of the time frame that it takes for us to get some wider operating rules in place. Also, I think that because you've kind of seen a slowdown in investment and in drone related things, not really in Adam's case, but you've seen a slowdown investment overall. But I think now that we've seen more, not just an acceptance from a regulatory standpoint or a better view of drone, but just from the public acceptance portion of viewing drones. You used to have this perception of people said the word drone and you had this perception of this MQ-9, dropping bombs on some poor people overseas. And that obviously there's no parallel whatsoever to the commercial UAS, but until people get their minds around what these drones are doing for good, which is kind of why I was a little disappointed to hear that Romeo Dersher was leaving DJI, because I think he's such a good ambassador for that drones doing good. I mean, he'll probably continue doing that, but those kinds of efforts, just constantly bringing out information about what the good things that drones are doing, the COVID response is added to that. And so I think we might see more investment now and more focus on pushing the market forward than we had maybe prior to COVID and this year. And that investment is going to drive technologies like the things that Adam's doing with autonomy and the things that other companies are doing with AI. And I think those two things are really going to drive the market forward, because where the rubber meets the road here is exactly what Grant was saying, is kind of taking the manpower out of the mix and having these autonomous and semi-autonomous solutions, so where we can put the manpower in overseeing these operations and actually having eyes on the drone itself. So you can have maybe in the military, in the defense world, military, we call it force multiplier, where we have drones that we're able to do more with less, if you will.
Absolutely, and there's so many directions we can take this. But Grant, he mentioned a little bit about that that regulation piece, and I know you've been working really hard on that. Can you talk about how creating these precedents in this year is going to change that for 2021?
Well, it's actually a good question, and one that's very ripe, I should say, and that I'm dealing with on several fronts. One of the sometimes frustrating things about being an attorney in a newer area of law is that without court cases, which we call jurisprudence, without that, you're kind of subject to the decisions of the agency. And then, you may have multiple agencies that are giving their opinions, but it becomes a battle over what's binding, what's not binding. And without that legal case truly being there, you're lacking that precedent. You could go and get an attorney opinion from the regulatory agency, but in most jurisdictions, that's considered persuasive and not necessarily binding. And in any event, certainly it does not supersede the authority of the judge. So what that means is that when you're navigating the regulations under Part 107 and the other parts that are being increasingly utilized, such as Part 135, it really, although 135 has been litigated quite a bit more because it's not drone specific, but 107 to this day does not have any true binding cases. Now there are a couple cases out there, but they're not binding. And by that, I mean an appellate court or the United States Supreme Court, for example, has not heard a Part 107 drone case and rendered a decision that would be binding on every single jurisdiction in the United States. That becomes tricky because often what we're finding is we're subject to the interpretations of the FSDO officer and various other individuals in the FAA. And to give them credit, I truly do believe there is a concerted effort among the FAA to have uniformity in their opinions. It's just difficult, like I said, when you're talking about a new concept for which there's no legal precedent. The FAA, which from the dawn of time has always prioritized safety, is not one to full-heartedly rush into setting precedents and letting these big grandiose missions set the stage for what may come behind them. So, when certain clients are performing these great operations, it's a catch-22 because the FAA loves that you're doing something that is helping them fulfill their congressional mandate of efficiently and safely integrating drones to the national airspace. But at the same time, just because someone like DroneUp, for example, may be operating safely does not mean that company X will be. And so while one reputable company in the industry may be able to pull something off because they take the time to put in all the safety mitigation measures, the FAA knows you can't count on that with every single company. That's where the catch-22 comes in. So it is incumbent, as always, upon the operator to know which patchwork of laws they're going to be governed by, because again, right now, federal law is not conclusively preemptive over state and local law, or at least the FAA doesn't make it that way. So state and local authorities do have some power there. So I have drone pilot networks that the moment they cross county lines, or in Louisiana, we call them parish lines, they can be subject to a different regulation. So my biggest wish for 2021, and I know the Supreme Court is probably tied up with other matters right now, but my biggest wish is that we will someday soon see a Part 107 case make it to the United States Supreme Court. And if I'm the attorney representing the drone company, that's just icing on the cake. But even if I'm not, I'd love to see it because I'd love to have some precedent in place. It would make a lot of drone attorneys' lives easier.
For the record, DroneUp does not want to be that first case that goes to the Supreme Court. Just want to make sure that everybody knows that we don't.
I wasn't talking about you.
I don't want to be that one.
No one's lining up to be in court with you, Grant. So just to go back a little bit, Mike brought up autonomy as being and also a key part of this, and Adam, I can't think of anyone better than to talk to you. How is autonomy going to shape 2021?
Yeah, I mean, when I think about 2021, it's hard for me not to get excited. I mean, I'll probably take a very Skydio-centric view here, but I think that, over the last year with Skydio 2, we've seen consumers doing all kinds of amazing stuff with the product. We have people out there filming their adventures in ways that would literally be impossible any other way. Like Skydio 2, from a consumer perspective, is like having a professional film crew out there with you that can fly itself, avoid obstacles, track moving subjects. And it's always been a big part of our vision to take that kind of technology foundation and expand into the enterprise. And for a lot of reasons, we think that now is the time. And this is something we've been leaning into from a product development perspective over the last 12 to 18 months. And so for us, 2021 is going to be about starting to ship the hardware and software products that I think are kind of the analogous autonomy, AI-centric view of what drones can do in the enterprise. It's not all going to happen in 2021, but we've got a lot of exciting stuff coming. So, for example, product like 3D scan, there's expert drone operators out there, probably folks that people on this call know, who are capable of doing these intricate inspections with drones flying in a manual way. And with 3D scan, we have the potential to automate that and dramatically scale it up. Another big example, which I think the folks at Skyward and Verizon are also very big on, is this idea of internet connectivity on the drone and being able to have it be remotely operated and have the information and the data that it's gathering be very quickly shared across organizations. I think purely from a Skydio standpoint, we're incredibly excited about the products that we have coming in 2021 that we think are, there's no magic step change, but I think they're, our hope is that they will begin to deliver on a lot of the promising concepts that have been out there in the enterprise world for years now.
Fantastic. Looking forward to seeing some of that stuff take place. And you mentioned Skyward and connectivity, and so I'd like to kick it over to Matt and ask, how is the 2020 going to impact 2021?
One of the things that 2020 reminded all of us is that uncertainty is undefeated, and there is, I think, the aperture of different kinds of outcomes that we can see in 2021 is both more encouraging in some respects, but also it's a reminder of just how hard this industry is. For every Skydio and DroneUp and Skyward out there, there are an equal, if not greater, number of companies that are, I think, in a worse position now than they were coming into this year. And we've worked with a lot of those folks over the last 6 or 7 years, and it's, I think, challenging to look forward and say, yeah, are we going to keep seeing regulations come at the pace that we have? If so, are all of these companies that are doing such innovative things, are they going to be able to sustain through that trough of disillusionment, and to use the kind of Silicon Valley terminology? I think we're really optimistic. We've seen a lot of steps forward that we think will carry over, whether it's the increase in beyond line of sight operations from the tactical BBLOS that we see so many Skydios used in, or the kind of true connected beyond line of sight work that I know Eros and we have done quite a bit of work in as well. And I think that I'm eternally optimistic, and I think Ted and I might have had a conversation about this a little over a year ago. We were talking about the remote ID rule, and we'd seen the NPRM and back in the before times when we could actually see each other in person. And I remember talking with Ted and Ken about this and saying, like, yeah, we're going to get the remote ID rule out. It's going to lead to all of these new kinds of advanced operations. Enterprises are going to be so excited to be able to comply. The FAA is going to use this as part of your safety mitigation, and we're going to see all kinds of great operations in 2020. And it's going to be almost a full year later from the NPRM being released then to the final rule. And even then, I'm sure there's going to be some uncertainty about implementation and all of that. It's this dichotomy that we keep wrestling with on our side. Is just how exciting is 2021 going to be? A lot of us think that we're right on the cusp of a real explosion in the drone industry's commercial viability and incredible kinds of new operations. But I think we've got to constantly check that with what is achievable and sort of what's reasonable to view. And 2021, I'm sure we're going to see examples on both sides of that.
Yeah, I'll actually just jump in and echo what Matt said, because we have talked about this, and I think also back to what Mike said earlier about, consolidation. We didn't see as much consolidation in 2020. I think a lot of decisions were put on hold because of COVID, but I think as the the COVID issue starts to wind down, hopefully in 2021, we may see more of those business consolidations in the UAS and the UTM community. And then I think hopefully with the FAA regulations, the new administration, those will move a little faster. And not just regulations. I think additional policy and guidance material from the FAA would really help enable the industry so that we can have those more routine advanced operations without every new operation having to be a big fight with the FAA and take years, that we can turn around those waivers or other issues, type certificates much faster in 2021.
Edgar or Tom, since you both have had experience working through those processes, do either one of you want to talk about how you're going to see those types of waivers and progress in 2021, especially in light of what happened this year?
Maybe I have a couple comments, and I definitely agree in regards to the panels in terms of I mean it's quite unknown, but I think there's things that are in play that were obviously mentioned, such as remote ID, obviously waiting for the final rule to actually be promulgated and finalized. But then also Grant touched on the airworthiness, at least the process and the publish of the G1 issue papers. I think that's all these working together and in tandem are going to allow the actual industry to move forward, potentially, hopefully in a much quicker pace. I understand we're in this crawl, walk, run situation, and we advocated always will advocate for safety in mind. However, we also want to make sure that we identify what our goals and focus are for 2021, and I mentioned it in regards to the adding new services such as within the healthcare industry, as well as maybe even additional transport of additional various commodities and other regulated goods. And I think all those items will lend themselves with what is currently in play, and very much looking forward to 2021, and we'll see what happens.
All right, so not unusual. I have a slightly different take on what I think will happen in 2021. I said in 18, don't expect anything big in 19. I said in 19, don't expect anything big in 20. And here coming at the end of 20, I'm going to say expect huge in 21. And I'm going to tell you why. Not because of the regulations, not because of policies, because the companies who have made progress this year have done it without any major regulatory changes or any major policy changes. It goes back to the how can we do, what can we do within the constraints, and how can we move the industry forward? Yes, there are companies with technologies and needs that require significant regulatory changes in policy, but not everybody does. And I've been saying that for a while. And so a lot of work has been accomplished, but there are some significant differences that I think are going to happen in 2021. For example, a lot of commercial companies in this industry have been working with what I would call indefensible business plans, ourselves included. A lot of, here's what the analysts say, here's what we say, we put it all together, we go, here's our business plan for the next 3 years, with a whole lot of not really knowing how much of that was really true. How many people were going to buy a particular software, a particular hardware platform? What was going to be the amalgamation of those technologies? And were there revenues in UTM and all this stuff, a lot of projections. And now we're starting to have companies with real revenues that I think are beginning to build defensible business models that are actually showing where there are foundational elements within our industry that we can build upon. And I think that's real. The second thing is those companies now that have some developing and recurring revenues can begin to approach strategic partnerships differently than we have in the past. In the past, in our industry being new, partnerships were how can we generate revenues quickly together because we need revenues. Now companies that have been around a little while, who are developing revenues, who are looking over the horizon, are beginning to have more strategic partnership conversations. Not how do we develop revenues tomorrow, but how is this going to develop and maintain revenues and position us a year, 2 years from now? And I think you're going to see a lot more of that happen in 2021. And then the last thing I would say is, you know, from our experience working with the FAA this year has been significantly different. And some people would say, well, maybe it was because of COVID or other things. But I think what I have found is that, you know, we, for example, have gone to the FAA and had almost near constant communication with them about what we're doing, how we're doing it, the justification for why we're doing it. But those of you who are in the military will know what I mean. We took a little bit of a by your leave, sir approach. Rather than going in and saying, may we do this? We did a lot of, this is what we're doing. And then going back afterwards and saying, how did we do? And sometimes it was a pleasant conversation. Sometimes it was, you know, not as pleasant of a conversation. But we developed an ongoing dialogue that I think is going to carry into 2021 that's going to be positive, not just for our organization, but for other organizations that are trying to do this. Because I think we've not only changed our approach to how we deal with the FAA, but I think the FAA's approach and how they're dealing with the industry has been somewhat altered in a very positive way. So I personally think 2021 is going to be good. The last thing I'll say is I look at it a little bit like the winter. I grew up in Arkansas, and the strong plants and the strong weeds and whatever all came back strong when the winter was over. I think COVID is a winter. I think some of the things are not going to survive the winter, but the ones that do are going to be tough. And I think we're going to have some rock star companies show off in 2021.
Fantastic. And that kind of leads me into my next question. I mean, you mentioned some of these things kind of falling off, looking beyond the brief rise of the sanitation pandemic and loudspeaker drone, which we were all familiar at. What practical applications have really been embraced by industry as a result of the events of 2020? And do you think these trends will continue into 2021? And I think this also ties into that public perception question where we're asking, are people starting to build demand for these services? Tom, I'd like to actually keep it with you if you'd like to answer that question.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've seen a lot of attempts to shoehorn our technology and our platforms as an industry into solving problems that may or may not be best solved with our technology, but at the same time, it's broader realization. Look, delivery, drones as a component of the intermodal delivery model are going to be around whether we like it or not. And the question that we've been able, what we've been able to accomplish as an industry, not Drone Up, but as an industry, by demonstrating that we can safely deliver products using drones, whether it's under 107 or if ultimately under 135, or as I predict, it's going to be a combination of the two for a variety of reasons. That narrative has changed. My team will tell you that wherever we were delivering this year, there were a line of cars driving up saying, how do we get that done? And when will you deliver products? And when will you be delivering products in our neighborhood? We've had multiple cities, dozens and dozens of cities who have now said, when are you going to be doing those deliveries in our cities? And so I think delivery is one thing that we got the opportunity to truly see the practical application to something that was discussed earlier. It gave us the opportunity to impact and influence the narrative on that. But it's also given us the opportunity to realize that what Adam and his company are doing with the autonomy, specifically in the public sector, in public safety, we haven't quite figured it out yet. No, I'm not saying that Skydio hasn't figured it out, but I'm saying public safety hasn't quite figured out how to integrate it, and that's not going to happen overnight. But I think we're going to see a big change in that in 2021 because people have recognized that there are ways that we can utilize that technology to keep us a little bit safer.
Fantastic. And Edgar, what do you think about some of what's been discussed?
I appreciate that. Absolutely. I mean, I definitely agree in regards to Tom's point about the continued expansion in regards to the transportation and really delivery business in regards to drones. I touched on it earlier in regards to for 2020, it actually really aligned with the ability to be able to support the social distancing norms and efforts that are required, as well as really being able to provide a reliable service much faster than normally had been provided with a traditional either courier method or others. But even into 2021, I still see that going, even if maybe the social distancing norms are not going to be as required maybe in the near future. However, we still see a demand by our customers in regards to the e-commerce and the ability to be able to have a package as quickly as possible. And so I think that even if it's not due to a pandemic, I think there's still the necessity that will still be require transportation and logistics businesses to be able to really focus and develop a model for drone transportation. And I think UPS Fly Forward is positioned well to be able to do so. Thank you.
Thank you. Mike, I'd like to kick it over to you. What are some of those practical applications that you see that are going to move us into 2021? Where's the growth happening there?
Well, I also see the growth in delivery. I think it's probably going to be more focused on where it is now, which is on critical items to deliver, medical supplies, medicines, those kinds of things. I kind of see, I do see a demand for the e-commerce, but I think that's mostly, and this is just my opinion. I'm sure Edgar's much smarter than I am on this, but I see that mostly from a demand in the rural areas where you cannot already get those kinds of deliveries given to you. In the urban environment, there's a huge infrastructure already to get things quickly, and FedEx and UPS have built that. So I see drones filling in the gaps because the infrastructure that's going to happen in urban environments for the last mile delivery is going to be, I think, is going to be quite expansive and extensive. So I do see a lot more interest in delivering the critical items, things that you really need now and quickly, and may not be able to get another way quickly. So I mean, I think that's why companies like Zipline and have been so successful in the delivery space so far. But I also see where you already see large ROIs, I see more adoption coming because of that inherent social distancing. We may not need it in the future, but if you can have it, and it already protects you to a certain degree from future gray rhino events like a follow-on pandemic to this, which this is not the last pandemic we're going to see, but if you have that methodology and already in place where you can say conduct inspections remotely, telepresence, I see those areas growing because you already see especially like in oil and gas and areas where you get quite a return on investment already. I see those areas growing with the areas that don't get quite the ROI growing after that, after you've realized some economies of scale from scaling up your business.
Absolutely. I agree, especially because as you pointed out, there are other benefits and return on investment that you can get from these types of services. So as you look to adopt drone technology, you're going to be looking at the long term. You're not going to be looking at this one point in
it's not always the bottom line, right? It could be an increase in safety. It could, there's other measures besides the dollar.
Absolutely. Adam, I'd like to kick it over to you. What are some of the growth factors you think are going to happen in 2021?
Yeah, I agree with what's been said so far, but I don't have a lot to add here. I think that the ability to get things done efficiently remotely, I think has really come into focus this year. I think that's going to continue. And even though it's not a space that we're in currently, I would have to agree. I think delivery is probably the biggest bump. I mean, it remains to be seen how durable that is after COVID ends, but I think this super efficient last mile delivery that drones have the potential to offer is clearly right now incredibly impactful. And Zipline, I think, is the furthest along this, but a lot of other folks are doing it as well. And if nothing else, I think that has showed what's possible, which will hopefully continue to let us all kind of like roll these things out in responsible ways over the next few years.
Absolutely. How about you, Grant? What are you seeing as the top trends in 2021?
Well, certainly, as Adam just mentioned, deliveries right now are definitely taking front center stage. I also think it's cool that we've had some newer applications like the stadium spraying, the disinfections and things like that. Not a big fan of public safety using the drones to tell people to stay in line. It's kind of Orwellian, and it's doesn't do much good for public perception. So that's one new use that I'm not a fan of. I think as we go forward into 2021, deliveries will continue to be a significant use case, a significant application. One of the things that market research has shown is that the consumer market has not taken off as quickly as industry insiders expected it to, but the commercial market, the use of drones in commercial industries has performed above expectations. And I think that's going to continue for various reasons. Drones this year showed us not only can you receive goods while social distancing, but if you can't send a human inspector out to inspect the power line because they're under most state laws, they're essential workers that could do so. But let's say one of them has COVID or doesn't feel comfortable leaving their house, you could send a drone up there to do that. We had a few companies this year use drones for the first time see how it was done as a result of COVID and are now incorporating it into their operations. So the additional uses such as inspections, photography, videography, all those will continue. Deliveries are really, I think, going to be the next big thing. Again, you have 3 Part 135 operators that I know of right now. You have 10 type certifications in queue. You have some others that, without going into detail, I can tell you there are several others that are going to be in queue very shortly. And we are going to get to a point where we see more Part 135 operators. The FAA, in speaking with them, a theme that they have continued to express over the past year, even before COVID, was encouraging Part 135 applications. It used to be this big frustration in the industry that you're trying to fit a square peg into a circle hole, because 135 was built for manned aircraft, but the FAA has stuck by and stayed true to their word. They're going to make deliveries fit within Part 135. It's not going anywhere. We have had some companies that have been able to really make the most out of Part 107 and perform deliveries that way, although you're limited, of course, because you can't go BVLOS or across state lines. But even so, the FAA really has shown an interest and encouragement for deliveries this year, and I think that's going to be the trend that continues.
Yeah, Grant, I'd just follow up on that. I think, some of the early COVID, UAS use cases were a little gimmicky. People trying to get some publicity out of a very, horrific situation. But I do think that the package delivery is where it's at. I mean, one thing we learned, we explored some work with the FAA, during some early COVID things, and it became quite clear quite quickly that the FAA wasn't going to give any regulatory relief, for the COVID situation. Some other countries, their aviation authorities were willing to, reduce some standards in order to get more operations out there, and that just didn't happen with the FAA. They gave us no credit early on for the fact that there were empty streets and empty sidewalks. Still they were considering it like you're flying over rush hour in downtown. So, there's still, the FAA still, their approach to risk considers air and ground risk, in isolation. They don't really balance the wider increase in safety you get, whether it's for delivering, medical things for COVID, or even like power line inspection. If you're removing a, manned helicopter doing a very dangerous low altitude operation with a drone, FAA doesn't give you any credit for what you're replacing the drone operation with. Removing cars and trucks from the roads. I mean, they cause, safety issues today delivering delivery vehicles. So I think, we've pushed a little bit at the DOT level to get some multimodal, safety credit. Hasn't gone real far, but we'll continue to push for that. But I think more importantly, and Grant, what you talked about, the type certificate in the Part 135 is really, we're just going to have to get over those hurdles to enable those delivery businesses.
Matt, last but not least, can you tell us a little bit about what you think will be the trends in 2021?
Well, I mean, this is a really smart group here, and I think when I was taking some notes on this question, it hit on all of those points. Delivery, I think we're really seeing the value, and it's almost, this was the year that showed the inevitability of that use case. It fits a number of different really key problem statements, and we saw a ton of progress, whether it's, Zipline, Matternet, Wing, like there's a whole host of them, not to mention the folks at Flight Forward. And I think that they've taken some big leaps in what is possible, and just, double tapping on Edgar's point about the medical delivery pipeline. I mean, we've got some vaccines coming. That's great. Hopefully that helps hasten the end of the pandemic, but it's still a massive infrastructure delivery challenge, right? Like it's still a really difficult problem. And I think that there's both a ton of possible use cases that we've seen big steps forward, and then we'll see those similar ones that the folks on the panel highlighted. But it would be interesting to pull on Grant's thread a bit more about the regulatory challenges, and I think they're really multifaceted there.
Absolutely. And I hopefully we'll be able to get into that in a bit. But until then, I'd like to kick a question over to Ted. Whether it is 2020 2019, 2020, or even 2021, there's always a talk about each year being poised for growth. And in some cases that has been true, but there's still a lot that hasn't materialized yet for the industry. What, in your opinion, is really holding the industry back? Is it people, processes, regulations, the technology, or a combination of these?
Thanks. Great question. First off, I don't think it's the people. I think our industry has a lot of innovators, a lot of startups, a lot of energy, a lot of backing of big companies. So I really don't think it's the people. I don't think it's the investment dollars. I mean, we're seeing a lot of that. I think it comes down to regulations and technologies, and a combination of those. I think from a technology point of view, I think it's the same two major issues that were the same when RTCA started SC 228 back in 2013, detect and avoid in C2. I think we're seeing progress on both of those fronts, but we really need to kind of just start allowing limited operations, collect more data, and expand those operations. But there's still some technology challenges, I think, in both the detect and avoid and the C2 front. From a regulation and guidance point of view, I think more work on getting away from the FAA's bring me a rock approach to safety, which is everyone just keeps bringing them another rock, and the FAA says no, that's not the right safety case for me. I think so we need more published not just regulations but also policy and guidance. So some of the more informal documents, the advisory circulars, other kind of published information. Right now, for example, Part 107 night waivers. It's pretty clear in the industry what it takes. Everyone kind of knows, there are websites that say what it takes to get a waiver, but the FAA hasn't published like an advisory circular or updated guidance that says, hey, just follow these steps and you can fly at night. And so instead they require every operator to put together a bunch of paperwork just to get a night waiver when everyone knows, in industry what it takes to get one. So I think more policy and guidance from the FAA would help. In terms of regulation, I think, at least from the UTM world where I live in, Europe's out ahead of the FAA. They have their use space regulations in very final format, expect to get published shortly. They create some new airspace structures to facilitate UAS operations. And I think it would be, great for the FAA to start the rulemaking process for UTM to kind of enable that. Because otherwise, I think Europe and some other countries are going to get out ahead of the US right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, we tend to look at everything through a product lens. So it's certainly the case that there are regulatory hurdles to some use cases. Some things that, we'd like to be allowed just aren't allowed, and there's more friction in some places than we'd like. But I also think that just within the current regulatory paradigm, and I think Tom did a good job speaking to this earlier, there's a lot of really useful stuff you can do. So one example that we see, like people have been talking about residential roof inspection with drones for years now, probably 5 or 6 years. People have been talking about doing residential roof inspection, post-storm, post-hurricane, detecting damage, and it makes a ton of sense. It's better than sending a person up on the roof to climb around. You get better data. It's safer, but it's not really something that's worked at scale. And I don't think it has a whole lot to do with regulation. With Part 107 and line of sight operations, you have everything you need to do this. But it's a very challenging task. It's hard to fly a drone reliably close to a roof, collect data, avoid obstacles. And this is an example where I think automation has a lot to offer. So this is something that we focused on quite a bit. We're launching a product called HouseScan in partnership with EagleView, which is a leader in the insurance claims processing space. And so I think there's reasons to be very optimistic about technology and product process progress, even absent significant regulatory breakthroughs, opening up a lot of exciting applications.
Fantastic. Tom, what do you think is what's holding the industry back from really growing the way that we expect it to? Is it people, processes, regulation, technology, combination?
I don't, again, I answered this question earlier when I said I think 2021 is going to be big, and we're not in a position, and perhaps it's because of what we're doing and how we're approaching it, that our growth, we feel like that our growth is being constrained by any outside force right now. We believe that there are opportunities to continue to do what we're doing, and again, I acknowledged earlier that not everybody has a product or a service that fits that can expand at the rate that it needs to in order to support what their business objectives are. But in our particular case, the industry is moving. We're moving forward. We hope that what we're doing is moving the industry forward and helping the industry. And I'll give you an example of what I mean by that. In the last 9 weeks, we've done over 2,000 miles of residential product delivering COVID test kits and other items. About 240 hours of delivery in the air into not just into residential neighborhoods, but right to the homes, right? And the data that we've gathered and that we've collected and we've documented over 150 lessons learned that we're not just sharing with our own team, but we're sharing with the FAA and we're sharing with the industry and we're sharing with our colleagues. We think that a lot of the industry is, if the regulations would change, we could do this. But at the same time, could you do it safely? Do you have the data you need? And so I think that all of us play a role in that. Grant, for example, plays that role in terms of policy and dealing with legislators and dealing with the FAA, and we deal with it down on the kind of deck plate level when we're flying in these different municipalities. And we talk about how somebody said earlier, you go across a county line. Try doing what we've been doing in terms of residential deliveries and learning that every FSDO views what you're doing just a little bit differently, and you're having a different conversation every single day in a new region. But we're establishing enough precedents and enough operational experience and documentation that we're starting to be able to build a business case that we can then turn around and hand to another partner in the industry, like a UPS or somebody else, and say, here's all of the data that we've collected that you can now utilize for bigger, heavier, longer, stronger. We don't personally run into that issue of being constrained in growth by what's happening outside. I would say at one point the concern was there wasn't going to be enough capital investment available to ensure that we were able to meet the demand for growth. But I haven't seen that. I've heard people say there's been a decline in investments as a result of COVID. But then when I look at the data, I don't see that decline in investment. I see fewer people actually raising, but I don't see fewer people who are unsuccessful in those raises. So I don't know that I see. I think, again, I'm gonna go back to what I said earlier. I think 2021 is a big opportunity for companies that are well capitalized, positioned for growth, and ready to move things forward.
Grant, can you tell us a little bit about what's holding us back?
So I think many people in the industry have said this. I think it still holds true that the regulatory environment cannot keep up with the technology. I think the manufacturers and the software developers and a lot of people who are stakeholders in this industry have made great progress. Again, when you're an entity that's regulated by the FAA, that agency is going to prioritize safety above all. It's not going to err on the side of it's going to err on the side of caution. It's not going to, you have to make the safety case, and sometimes you have to make it more than once and to several different people. And there's a reason why our airspace is known for being some of the safest in the world, and it's because the FAA does take such ownership in how they monitor the skies and keep them safe. The biggest hurdle, so I think that's the biggest hurdle to advancing this industry. It's having the regulatory environment and public perception keep up with the technological development. I mentioned earlier that Congress is, even just this year, has taken a much more significant interest in drones than it has in years past. I think that's going to continue. We're starting to see legislators on the state level take more interest. And I personally have seen city councils and municipal officials take interest. I believe that's going to continue, and all these things will come together to help advance the industry. But if you're talking about roadblocks and obstacles, it's always going to be that the regulatory environment and public perception can't keep up with the technological advancement.
I can add to that. And this is something that it's funny. It's something that Tom Walker and I bonded over a couple of years when we first met, because I had the unenviable task of following him on stage at Interdrone and at this this conference in person, and his entire mantra was, look, stop griping about the rules that we don't have. Let's maximize and optimize what we can do with the rules that we do have in 107. And so I think there's been a greater focus on that, but I think the gap that we haven't completely bridged yet is, there are limitations to what we can do regulatory, but there's also a lot more that companies can do to express the benefits of drones to their potential clients. And so that being able to tell that story isn't always easy. You might know how to operate a drone, and you might know how to collect the data and process the data and present the data. But can you take that data and turn it into something that you can put in front of a C-level executive that allows them to make a yes or no decision right now? And so to me, that's where a large gap is. And, and I'll take what Adam said earlier as an example for the roof inspections that they're going to be doing with EcoView. I guarantee you there are hundreds of inspectors out there, of insurance inspectors, that have no idea that there's an automated capability to create a very precise three-dimensional model of people's roofs in no time flat. And that's part of the what gap needs to be filled from Adam's company to Skydio and companies like that to say, look, we have this capability. Here's how it can benefit you. We need to tell you that story. And so that I think that's really the last sort of bridge that we have to cross. And it's going to be different for different use cases, different for different industries, oil and gas, renewables, insurance inspections, utilities inspections. They're all going to have different use cases. They're all going to have different measures of what drone benefits can provide, whether it's an optical gas inspection, or whether it's a vegetation index that comes from a multispectral camera on a drone that flies much further than what some multi-rotors can do. It just depends. But and that's why I think a lot of the companies that you see out there that are very successful from a drone services provider standpoint are the ones who have really focused on a vertical. It got smart about what tools the subject matter experts need from drones and how they can tell that story and bridge that gap. And I think the more we do that, the more adoption you'll see, and the quicker adoption you'll see, aside from all the regulatory issues.
You need to build to what the industry needs. And it's such a valid point. And some of the interesting things that have come out of UPS, Edgar, to kind of drive that drone delivery. Can you talk a little bit about how what are the gaps that are still there?
Absolutely. I appreciate the question. And I think it's been touched on quite a bit in regards to, we really want to be able to see the full potential of drone technology, and it's going to require the regulators to expand the use of delivery drones, but always in a safe manner. So luckily, UPS has provided input and to the regulators in regards to that are responsible for the establishment of the integration safely into the NAS by having one of our senior executives actually serve as an advisor on the DAC. And so I think those continued collaborations and dialogue with the regulators are going to be what allows for that continued integration. In addition, I think it's also, that's just the regulatory piece. There's so many other facets that I think we can touch on. Continued work with additional drone manufacturers and additional technology to really identify new use cases, build new drones, build various cargo capabilities, so not just the small UAS, but going beyond that. I think that's what our focus is going to be, really be geared towards, is a sort of full inclusion of various use cases that we'll be able to utilize. And I think there's another comment in regards to whether it's the people, and I agree that incredibly smart individuals that are leading the industry forward, but we'll caveat that it's also our responsibility to really attract and keep the number of individuals that are going to be interested, and really also identify diverse talent as we move forward as in this nascent industry, really for drone delivery and actually the whole UAV industry to be able to foster that new talent and potentially work with educational institutions to really develop that for a new industry, and be very interesting to see that, and very excited.
You know, you bring up a really interesting point. It's not a question I actually had planned out today, but I'd like to throw it out there. You know, what is the role of education in reaching youth to growing this industry and to create and normalizing this industry?
Danielle, I just briefly, I don't want to hog the episode, but one of the things that I'll say is education, the importance of it cannot be overemphasized. It's critical that we support STEM programs and encourage children to become accustomed to and familiar with drones, not just children, but adults too. We, you know, some of my clients, and not just my clients, other companies have excelled because they've brought their drones out to demo in parking lots, in stores with people to touch them, to ask questions about them. So in that way, you're educating the public, but then you also have the true blue education, having unmanned systems curriculum in schools. That's absolutely imperative, and not just because people in general need to know more about unmanned aircraft systems, but it also goes a long way in increasing and encouraging diversity in the industry as well. I know that Fletcher Technical Community College, which is a community college in Louisiana, is having a drone program this summer, and I already decided I'm sending my 2 daughters there. I think we need to have more child education. We need to have more people learning about this technology, that it can be used safely. If it is dangerous, show them how it's dangerous. But if it's safe, show them how it's safe. And I think that's a piece of the puzzle that absolutely has to fall into place.
Thank you, Grant. I'd actually like to keep you on for a moment because I think we're going to jump into type certification and how that's going to impact the industry in 2021 and beyond. Do you think it'll accelerate or in regulations and adoption, or is it too steep of a hurdle for the industry?
Type certification is an interesting animal for various reasons. I think many people in the industry would be surprised to know that we're actually a little bit further along than you would have thought. The policy, at least the final policy, only came out recently, but again, you already have 3 Part 135 operators who, you know, as of now, there are no type certified drones, so they're operating under other with other legal abilities, but you have 10 in place to receive type certification. I think that's going to be huge. You have several more on the way. I think it is, just like everything else in this industry, the Wild West. The FAA, I think, to an extent, is figuring it out as it goes. I don't know that you can do it any other way. Again, no precedent. And that's, you know, as an attorney, it is frustrating, not the FAA, but it's frustrating to be navigating a space where there is no legally binding precedent. But the best you can do is just take things as they come and communicate with the agencies that are going to be regulating you. And I have high hopes for type certification. I think that it not only is going to open the door primarily it's going to open the door for those operators that want to engage in Part 135 operations, because under Part 135, you have to have a type certified drone unless you have a specific exemption. They're not too keen on granting that specific exemption except in certain key instances. So having that type certification is going to be imperative if you want to be a Part 135 operator. And I do believe that it's not just a trend. I think it's going to be here to stay. And you're seeing a lot of companies who are jumping on that wagon as we speak.
Fantastic. Anyone else want to jump in about type certification?
Yeah, I'll jump in there, Danielle, and kind of loop back to a couple of the other points previously made. I think Grant's right on that type certification is another really impressive step forward. And this goes back to something that Tom brought up earlier. the people in this industry really are innovative. And I would say, even when we're trying to push the regulators to see things from perhaps a different perspective, even the folks on our regulatory partners, they are also trying to navigate this new environment. And I really appreciate that even as they've been hamstrung in certain ways, the FAA is still leaning in. I know that from our experiences with the FAA, we've had a ton of successes, whether it's the Lance program, work for beyond visual line of sight, upcoming remote ID implementations. There's just so much forward thinking from the FAA that even within the broader DOT context, the folks that we work with really are some of the most innovative. And I think that just speaks to the testament of the kinds of folks that are drawn into this industry. But it's worth emphasizing Grant's point too, that we've got to continue to bring in additional voices, and whether that's diversity of thought and diversity of representation, I think the industry is going to be better when we do balance all of those concerns. Because one of the things that I'm worried about, and I don't think our process and regulatory and technological improvements really solve for, is the public perception problem. And there are plenty of use cases that the public, I think, repeatedly are concerned about. You may have seen that there have been quite a few state and local governments that are getting more and more interested. And I know there's a recent case out of Texas that I think has a lot of us really questioning, okay, what's our path forward if this really is the way that the laws are going to go? And some of those things are regulatory, some of those things are legal in nature, and a lot of them are public perception in their root. And I think that if we aren't trying to address all of those challenges, we're doing ourselves a disservice, and we're going to kind of extend the timeline for real widespread implementation.
I can jump in here. I think that with respect to type certification, I mean, I think the really big headline piece of good news is that it shows the FAA is taking seriously opening up a path to repeatable beyond visual line of sight operation. And I think that's great. Like, that's something that I think we all see the customer need for, and starting to see some daylight open up and how we can get there, I think is very positive. I will say that I think that trying to put drones through the same sort of notionally the same process, the same type certification process that jetliners go through, is not ideal. And I think the FAA has done a lot of work to try to kind of right size the process and adjust it for drones. But fundamentally, drones just operate in a different regime of size, weight, cost, power. And I think that a regulatory approach that takes that into account is ultimately going to be one that leads to better outcomes. So, an example, whenever anybody sits down to design any kind of flying machine, basically the first thing you figure out is what payload does it need to carry? How long does it need to fly for? And that basically tells you how big that system needs to be. And the optimization that you go through in any kind of design process is trying to make the thing as small and light as possible, because smaller and lighter means safer, it means quieter, it means more power efficient. And the way that the type certification works, it requires a lot of things from the hardware that adds additional cost and complexity and ultimately weight and power, which I think if viewed in the wrong way, takes us in kind of completely the opposite direction, where a drone that, for the mission it needs to perform, something that could weigh a pound or two and be nearly silent and pose almost no risk to anybody on the ground or in the air or anything, ends up weighing 5, 10, 15 pounds, and all of a sudden is a giant heavy beast that is in an entirely different risk regime. And so I think that's something that we all need to be cognizant of. And I think there are folks at the FAA that get this, but our hope is that the type certification process will either explicitly recognize size and weight classes, or we'll see something else that does, because I think otherwise we risk ending up in a place where we're actually less safe and less reliable than we could be by virtue of requiring bigger, heavier, more expensive vehicles.
Excellent point. And it's a challenge to figure out that kind of how do you weigh safety against that kind of practicality of the machine that needs to be up in the air.
Yeah, I mean, just to follow on to that, I mean, I think the bottom line for safety oftentimes is size and weight. If something is super small and super light, it's inherently safe. So I think we just need to see that more explicitly reflected.
Yeah, Adam, I think the one other thing I would add to that is that the use case matters. I think, the same vehicle can be safe for one use case. Maybe it's tactical, beyond visual line of sight, type inspections that would be unsafe for another, flying up at flight levels with the airlines, So I think, and that's something that the FAA struggled with is traditional aircraft, once you certify aircraft, it can be used for any job anywhere, helicopter, for pretty much anywhere. While for drones, we want to somewhat couple them. And that's what, ASTM and the SORA did with operational risk assessment is you couple both the vehicle and the use case. And I think that's just something that with the type certificate process is going to have to handle is how do you impose appropriate operational limitations such that you can certify it for certain operations, but not necessarily, open it up to any sort of operation.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think that's another great point. And that's something that we think a lot about as a company. I mean, for a lot of the work that we do with our customers, the drone is, sort of similar to like a football in the airspace that it operates. It's like, it's close enough to the ground that somebody could have thrown a football at that height, and it's in a similar size and weight regime, which is entirely different from flying up in airspace where you're actually interacting with manned air traffic.
Excellent point, Ted. Looking at, the different types of programs that the FAA is putting out there to test these things. Like we now have the new FAA Beyond program. Looking at the previous programs that just came to a close, how are programs like this realistically moving those regulations forward and starting to think about all these different use cases?
I can jump in on this one, Danielle. I think that the FAA has been remarkably opportunistic about where can they get funding and focus on their end to try and answer some of these questions that we're bringing up. How do we right size the regulations, to borrow Adam's phrase earlier? How do we try and have the regulations keep up with how quickly the technology is advancing, as Grant was talking about too? And the IPPs was definitely one of the programs that they tried to shoehorn into one of their many programs to move things forward. And while there were certainly some successes and that was laudable, I think that as we were moving through the IPP process, it became clear we weren't going to get all the way there. We weren't going to come out of the IPPs and have the blueprint for here's the right kind of type certification that we need. Here's the ready-made regulations and standards for a true integrated BVLOS system. Here's all of the components that we need for remote ID and for other UTM services. But I think that with the focus on this next set of programs around Beyond, the idea is that they continue with that momentum and they try and wrap their arms around some of these problems, continue to work with their partners that are leaning in this innovative way, and hopefully come out the other end answering as many of these challenging questions as we're able to over the next couple of years. I will, I'm optimistic about that opportunity, but I also think we have to be realistic that even as many of us on this call have various solutions that we bring to various aspects, I still think that for full integration, we're still a ways away from answering all the problems for all the use cases, and we've got to keep working with the regulators to make that happen.
Absolutely. Mike, I saw you shake your head. Do you have something to add there?
Well, I agree completely with Matt that we're a long ways away from having the answers for everything. I think the UIPP was good. I think Beyond is interesting because if you look at the FAA website, they talk about really focusing on getting data for establishing rules rather than just waivers, and also collecting data so that you can have or you can develop performance-based standards. And I think developing those performance-based standards is really going to go a long way towards advancing the industry, especially if we can get those standards globalized. If you start having a bunch of different standards for the US and Europe and, different areas where, you already see in UAE and India, both of them having their own, digital sky, and I can't remember the other one, Sky Dome or something. Anyway, where you have to have your special hardware just to get permission to take off and fly in the airspace. It's different from everywhere else. I think that's actually kind of taking a step back, even though it's helping those areas develop commercial UAV. it's kind of closed off to the rest of the world unless you can figure out some way that your system can work in every system. So I think going towards building standard, performance-based standards, and with remote ID, airworthiness, eventually sensing or detect and avoid, all those standards I think are going to have to be homogenized globally for this market to really, see its potential.
100%. And then actually, you brought up remote ID, and I'd love to ask the question. We're going to be seeing that the release of remote ID, and EASA is releasing some of their rules to more greatly homogenize their scenario. Are we ready for all these changes as an industry?
I'll jump in on remote ID. It's a topic I've been deep involved in from the NPRM on. I think it's kind of TBD what the final FAA rule will look like. There's still some questions related to, I think we've heard that it'll likely be a broadcast only rule, but, will there be any exceptions? How is privacy and security going to be addressed, which are some concerns with the broadcast system? How is it going to work in urban areas where broadcast, based on Bluetooth and Wi-Fi have range limitations? So I think it's still a little TBD based on the final rule. Definitely the ASTM standard will likely need to be updated based on the rule to make some changes. But I think, in general, industry is ready to comply. And I think, what you're seeing in Europe is, Switzerland has already stood up a system, and they're going to do network remote ID next year across the whole country and require everyone to participate in network remote ID. And so I think, the technologies are matured. And so it's just a matter of getting those regulations and make sure we address all the security and privacy concerns. I know, Matt, you've also done a lot of the remote ID stuff as well.
Yep, we've been working on this for years and years now, it feels like. And I think that after the NPRM, the proposed NPRM came out at the end of last year, there was a lot in there to like, and a lot in there that we thought needed to be improved. And I think that was reflected in a lot of the comments that were filed on that rulemaking. We're really eager to see what the final rule looks like. I mean, we've had a number of conversations with folks in industry about what may or may not happen. And I agree 100% with Ted. It's likely that the ASTM standard is going to need to be updated. But again, I think this speaks to how the FAA wants to move these things as quickly as they can. They convened a group of UTM companies to implement remote ID, and there was some pretty significant progress, and I would say really helpful dialogue that came out of those conversations with us and with others at the FAA. I think that implementation, if it's anything like the proposed rule, there's going to be some time for compliance. There's definitely going to be some different levels, but the FAA and I think industry, we're all committed to this. We think that this is the right step for safety. It's the right step to get to some of these more advanced operations. And this is going to be a key component for everyone to focus on in 2021 and beyond.
Now I'm interested in finding out from service providers, Tom and Adam, from the manufacturer side, how you're anticipating the remote ID.
Yeah, I would speak to that. I mean, I think short answer, yes, we're ready. We I think like everybody else read the NPRM with quite a bit of curiosity and enthusiasm, and had some comments that I think that it wasn't perfect, but generally we're moving in the right direction. And I think this is one of these kind of building block elements from a regulatory perspective that needs to be in place for the future that we all envision. So I don't think that it's not going to be overnight transformative, but I think it's a healthy thing to have in place. And I also expect that we'll see it evolve as it gets rolled out and as companies start to implement it, and as we see it have impact in the market.
I agree with Adam on that. But I'll go back and answer the question we were on at the time. I got disconnected and bring it full circle back to here, and that is type certification. And you ask how that's going to impact the industry. And the reality is I think type certification is going to enhance certain applications quicker that need quickly. Long-range inspections. I think it's going to transmogrify some other applications that up until now we haven't been able to identify the value. I don't think it's going to do a thing for delivery for at least 2 years, because coming full circle on that until we have RID, until we have ubiquitous detect and avoid, until we have some of these other things figured out. We're not going to be concentrating drones in high residential areas doing autonomous delivery for a while. But I think all of these things add up to a solution, and some of us want that to be here today, and some of us recognize it's 2 years from now. And what we all hope is that it's somewhere in the middle.
Excellent. Edgar, what are your thoughts about remote ID and how it's going to impact your business?
Yeah, absolutely. So ultimately, we do support the adoption of a performance-based approach to remote identification. It's obviously going to be unknown until the actual final rules get published. That we'll be able to digest them a little bit easier. But ultimately, UAS technology is still progressing at a rapid pace, and the adoption of a rigid standard or methodology for remote ID sort of runs that risk of being able to foreclose any kind of work for promising new approaches to the problem. So we hope that it's going to be cost effective in its design and be able to leverage really some of the emerging technologies without really having to rely on additional rulemaking in regards to their adoption. And so ultimately, we want the robust framework for the operations and for future growth, so that goes to the safety and privacy concerns, but also that there at least maintain a flexible approach, especially maybe to the internet component for, under certain circumstances. That way it allows operators and the industry to be able to continue and grow.
Excellent point. The agility and the flexibility to be able to adjust to those many different types of jobs that we're all going to see is going to be an important part of remote ID. So Grant, how is this going to impact, you think, all of the other types of waiver certifications and so on as it comes out in the coming year?
Well, there's one thing that, in the midst of all this discussion about remote ID, which is huge and which we've been waiting to come out for a while now, we're also anticipating a rule that will ease the restrictions of operating over people. That also is very significant, and that will directly affect waivers. I'm actually working on an ops over people waiver right now for a client that knows full well it could be moot, in the coming weeks. But the problem is when you play this game, you don't know with certainty when the rule's going to come out. They can tell us New Year's Eve till they're blue in the face, and I really do think they mean it this time. I truly do. But we've been fooled before. And sometimes it's not just the FAA, it's OIRA or some other agency. There's a holdup, there's a hiccup in the chain. So that's why, some clients don't have the luxury of waiting. Of course, now we're mid-December. But prior to this, clients, they don't have the luxury of waiting several weeks to begin operating over people or beyond line of sight, because whoever it is hiring them and expects them to do that right away. So the point I'm making is that I do think it's going to have a significant effect on waivers to an extent. I think remote ID is going to have some form of an implementation period. It was proposed 3 years in the latest draft. We don't know what the final rule is going to say. I know there was a lot of pushback about that 3-year implementation period. I think the ops over people waivers are going to be the first to change drastically. Not saying they won't be needed anymore, they might. But oftentimes when a UAS operator is hired, the company that's hiring them wants them operating right away, wants them to get that waiver right away. And there have been companies in the past, and I've heard horror stories, who didn't pursue waivers because they were banking on a rule coming out, which it didn't end up coming out, and their client ended up not being happy about it because they weren't putting the steps in place. The point I'm making with all this is I truly do believe both are going to be out by the end of the year. We shouldn't be terribly shocked if there is some delay, but they're both great things for the industry, and they will have effects on waivers. I mean, a large part of the reason, especially ops over people, why that proposed rule was even brought into place is because the waiver process was becoming pretty burdensome. It used to be that they could say up to 90 days, like we're going to try and get to you 90 days. Some companies are able to get it much quicker. Some it takes a little bit longer, but with this new rule, I think it's going to definitely change the waiver landscape quite a bit. And I think at some point, remote ID will for other types of waivers, especially BV laws as well.
Fantastic. So I'm going to go to the question that I'd like to wrap our conversation with is, did you learn anything new from the events of this year that you will take into 2021, especially from having to suddenly do all of your business remotely? Tom, I saw you nodding your head.
I'll jump on that
first?
one real quick and just and throw a little of my own stuff out in the street here. So, one of the things is that I'll tell you a story, and it's exactly an example of us not having the opportunity in the industry to go to industry events and socialize and network with peers in our industry, because that's how a lot of good partnerships, collaboration, ideas get triggered, is sometimes sitting around over a cocktail in the after hour things, right? Earlier this year, I went into the office for the first time, and I walked in and there were some Skydio drones sitting in boxes in one of our desks. And I said, cool, what are those here for? And they said, oh, well, because we're going to be testing those with EagleView. And we fly thousands of EagleView flights. I know Adam, and the only way I'm finding out that we're going to be testing the Skydio drones with EagleView is because they were sitting on the desk, and our organization had never had a conversation about it. And the truth of the matter is, those are the type of things that we should be talking to our peers in the industry. We've got inspection projects now that we need to be talking to Adam's team about and using the autonomy to expand it, not just roof inspections, but others. So this lack of engagement that we're having at these types of social events in our industry is a big risk to our ability to co-innovate together and keep lines of communication open. And we need to take a significant effort to try to make sure that we don't allow ourselves to get slowed down by that. We don't innovate on these webinars where we're talking like this. We talk and we listen, but we don't engage like we do at events. So I'm hoping we're not going to get back to those type of networking events right away, but I've learned that we've got to figure out how to keep that dialogue going somehow better than we have.
100% agree. And I'm looking forward to September 7th through 9th when in Las Vegas, Commercial UAV Expo is going to come. Ostensibly, we're going to be there. That's the hope anyways. With the vaccine coming, we might be able to get together soon. Mike?
Yeah, so Danielle, I take a little bit different approach there because pretty much everybody here offers services, whereas we do more consulting and more soothsaying about the future, I guess, if you will. But so it's our job to kind of understand where the growth opportunities are coming up in the future. And it's very interesting because the thing that I see changing for next year is I think there's going to be more of that happening, more companies coming to us and asking us, what are you seeing? Where are the opportunities? Because they actually know that there's a market to go to. Whereas before, just the awareness of drones themselves is going to drive, and the capabilities, some of it because of COVID response, some of it because of the increase in positive information in general, and just the technologies that are going into all this and how they overlap, AI and things like that, Internet of Things. I think it's going to drive, and it has already driven more business to us to see, where are the gaps? Where can we benefit from drones, even if we're not in the drone market? Where can we benefit? Where can we add those tools to our toolbox in order to make our operations more efficient? So I see that growth happening more so in 2021 than before.
Fantastic. All right, let's go to Grant. What have you learned from this year that you hope that you're going to take into 2021?
Well, the absolutely strangest thing about this year is I have probably 15 clients whose hands I've never shaken, whom I haven't taken out to dinner or drinks. And, one of the things whenever I'm hired that I like to do is, regardless of where the client is, whatever part of the country, I like to take them out. And now Tom Walker's an exception. I couldn't avoid seeing him too long. So I actually have had the pleasure of meeting Tom in person. But several clients that I've picked up since COVID started, I've never seen in person. And that is so strange. And so what this year has taught me is that, you know, there will never be a substitute for being able to physically be in someone's presence and to entertain them, get to know them face to face. But when pushed to it, humans will make do. You know, we'll find a way. One of the biggest attributes about drones is their adaptability. They can be used for various purposes and change course, you know, at a moment's notice. And I think that kind of goes with the industry in general. We're adaptable. We have several end user industries we serve. We have several ways that we are trying to get this message out. And, you know, it has been an absolute crazy year, one that I probably would not want to repeat, but for a lot of us in this industry, it has been a silver lining. And going into 2021, I will never take an in-person conference for granted ever again. That's probably the biggest thing. I will be in Las Vegas in September, whether Commercial UAV Expo happens or not, because I'm just, you know, I'm just resolving to be there. But I really truly do hope that I get to see everyone and finally meet everyone face to face in the very near future.
Well, Grant, talking about conferences, you know, we had at Aeros planned our big launch of our public safety solution at AUVSI Exponential back in May, and it was going to be in Boston, which would be great for me because I live in Boston. It would be one conference I didn't actually have to travel for. But, you know, we had to pivot and adapt, and we ended up starting to do more webinars to sell the public safety solution. And it actually worked out very well because we were able to get almost more people in a targeted market. You know, we were getting targeted, you know, sheriff's departments or police departments and fire departments on webinars, and could really walk them through our product, answer questions, probably in almost more than we could do, you know, just having a booth at a trade show. So I think we have found how to adapt and use, you know, these virtual, you know, tools. Same thing in the research side, you know, with the FAA's UTM pilot program. We were supposed to do, you know, 3 weeks of live flights in both Virginia and New York to develop the UTM and do demonstrations of remote ID and strategic deconfliction. And we had to pivot to do some of those in simulation only. And I think, you know, we learned more technical issues with the simulation side than we would have just everyone standing around, you know, doing flight tests. That actually sometimes, you know, taking a step back and not doing those live flights and instead focusing on simulation, you can dive in a little deeper into some of those technical issues than you would otherwise. So I don't have a crystal ball for how 2021 is gonna go, but you know, I sure hope we're moving in the right direction.
Fantastic. Adam, what you being a drone manufacturer, what did you learn in 2020 that maybe we'll take forward in 2021?
Well, I certainly echo what's been said. I think that one of the things that we've seen is that it's certainly possible to keep operating in the face of social distancing and everybody or most folks working from home, but it's also not nearly as much fun. So I'm certainly looking forward to getting to you know, work with our team in person way more, and also getting to spend way more time in the field in person with customers. I think that's really the most satisfying part of what we do. Having said that, I mean, this is kind of an off-topic answer because we're here to talk about drones, but I'm kind of struck, and I think we haven't talked about this enough as a civilization. I mean, it really is a miracle that we could keep operating at all with most folks working from home. And I think that, you know, taking sort of the macro view, just the existence of the internet and email and Slack and video conferencing and digital collaboration tools, like, it's just crazy that the world has essentially kept functioning anywhere close to normal in the presence of the pandemic. And so I think that we, you know, I don't know, there's a lesson there, but I think that it's always worth taking the big view and appreciating what we do have. And I think that there is, in spite of all the challenges, I think there's a lot to be thankful for.
I agree. We're learning so much about digital technology, and there's this really interesting new technologies. People are starting to look at how these events are being run and how connections happen, and we're starting to understand physical events and why they're so effective, and we're trying to find digital corollaries. Very difficult. We've experienced that through this event season, so I totally agree. Edgar, what do you think? Anything you've learned that is going to go into 2021 with you?
Yeah, absolutely. It was touched on earlier in regards to sort of that connection in regards to these various conferences, and for me, they were me personally, they were such a source of educational learning and knowledge sharing. This was rather a new industry that that UPS was sort of entering, and so therefore I try to act as a sponge in regards to these various conferences that I would generally attend, and so I got quite a bit of that, and fortunately, I think as Ted mentioned that some of the moves into various webinars has actually been somewhat helpful for me to be able to at least continue sort of that knowledge sharing, and I do appreciate that. However, as we wrap up 2020, all of us at Fly Forward are really proud of some of what we've achieved for this challenging year. We celebrate every success. Each milestone really gives us a deeper understanding of drone technology and the lessons on how we can effectively deploy drones in our healthcare campuses, but really also in any other industry such as retail or industrial supply chains. We understand innovation takes time and patience, but there's no denying that the U.S. drone delivery industry has come a long way in a little bit over a year. And UPS Fly Forward is really committed to using this technology and this existing technology to transform the way we do business. So as we look forward to 2021, Fly Forward wants to optimize, expand our existing commercial operations. We want to continue to influence the FAA to safely arrive at more complex operations through the use of the Beyond program. Excited in regards to our participation in regards to that. Being able to deploy air and ground-based detect and avoid technology to support really flights that are going to go beyond visual line of sight, I think are going to be critical. But really ultimately, we want to be able to integrate the drone delivery into the UPS Smart Logistics Network, and that's what we anticipate for 2021 and beyond. Thank you.
Thank you. Matt, can you talk about some of the things you've learned through this year?
Yeah, for sure, Danielle. I think that it is worth looking at how a lot of us have been incredibly lucky to continue moving this industry and moving our businesses forward in the face of a once-in-a-century global pandemic. But it's also, I think, a reminder of the responsibility that we have in an industry that can make a difference in people's lives and can improve our society with this really incredible technology that let's not lose sight of that big picture as well. And I think that's something that our team stepped back in our 2021 planning sessions. And we said, yeah, we had some great successes over some incredible challenges this year, but how can we apply those to the things that might help alleviate the problems that we see around the world and certainly in the US. And I think that that's one thing that we're going to take into 2021 is a continued commitment to this idea that drones are transformative, and let's try as best we can to use them in a way that benefits the society at large.
Yeah, I think that's been a lesson learned for a lot of people like that are finally looking at drones for the first time because they had no other way this year to even think about it. They're starting to see the value and the return on investment that drones can bring into their business model, and that's really important. It goes back to some of the things we talked about today. And so I'd like to thank everyone for joining me today and for your participation. It's been a really great conversation, and I hope you all have happy holidays.
Thanks for putting this on.
Thanks, Danielle.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Danielle.
Everyone.